In the last lesson, you learned how to determine the number of any interval, and you also learned to be able to make educated guesses as to the quality of any interval. Now it's time to learn definitively how to determine exactly what the quality of virtually any interval is. And we're going to do that using our knowledge of major scales. So, quick disclaimer, if you are not 100% confident with your major scales and major key signatures, now is the time to review, because this lesson relies heavily on that knowledge. So that out of the way, what we have on the board here is a C major scale. And when you were first learning about major scales, you likely learned that they sound the way they do because of their pattern of half steps and whole steps. That is, between the first note of the scale and the second note of the scale, you have a whole step. Between the second and the third, you have a whole step. Third and fourth, you have a half step, and so on, leading to the pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, that's one way to define a major scale, by comparing consecutive notes, but that's not the only way to define a major scale. What if instead of comparing consecutive notes, we compared all of the notes of the scale to the single most important note in the scale, which of course is the tonic, and in our example here, it's C. So in other words, we would compare the tonic to the second note of the scale, the tonic to the third note of the scale, tonic to the fourth note of the scale, and so on. And as you can imagine, when we do this, we're going to come up with a set of intervals. And that's exactly what we have here. So here's kind of the trivial case, the tonic compared to itself. Now we have the tonic compared to the second note of the scale, the tonic compared to the third note of the scale, and so on, all the way down to the tonic compared to the eighth note of the scale. Okay, let's get to work identifying some of these intervals. So let's start with this one. This one, of course, is going to be a unison in number. This one right here, C to F, is going to be a fourth. C to G is going to be a fifth. And C up to the higher C is going to be an octave. Now, because we're dealing with a major scale, and because we're comparing notes of the scale to that same tonic each time, for each one of these, the unison, the fourth, fifth, and the octave, the quality is going to be perfect in all cases. So this is a perfect unison, this is a perfect fourth, this is a perfect fifth, and this is a perfect octave, which is pretty great. Now let's take the remaining intervals. This, of course, is a second, this is a third, this is a sixth here, and this is a seventh there. Now, because we're dealing with a major scale, and we're comparing notes of the scale to the tonic each time, all of these, the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, they're all going to be major in quality. So major second, major third, major sixth, and major seventh. So this is fantastic. This is another way of defining a major scale. When you're defining a major scale, you can say, well, it's got a tonic, which makes a perfect unison with itself. You've also got the note that is a major second above the tonic. You've also got the note that is a major third above the tonic, perfect fourth, and so on, all the way up to perfect octave. Another way to think of it is that all of the intervals with respect to the tonic are either perfect if you've got a unison, fourth, fifth, or octave, or major if you have a second, third, sixth, or seventh. And this is true for any major scale, not just C major. We have D major here as another example. The same pattern is going to hold true. So from D to itself, the tonic to the tonic, it's a perfect unison. From D to the second note of the scale, which in this case is E here, it's a major second. D to F sharp is a major third. D to G is a perfect fourth, and so on down the line. So this is really important information that we can now harness in order to be able to figure out the quality of virtually any interval. Given the knowledge that we just acquired, we now have a method for determining the quality and the number of virtually any interval. And that's just a simple two-step process. First, you figure out the number of the interval, which is very easy. And then second, you ask this all-important question: does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? In other words, is it something like this over here? If the answer is yes, then you're dealing with either a major interval, if it's a second, third, sixth, or seventh, or a perfect interval, if it's a unison, fourth, fifth, or octave. Now, if the answer is unfortunately no, then you're going to have to do a little bit of comparing, but we'll see examples of both of these scenarios. So let's get started here. We got a C up to an A. Step one, of course, get the number down. That's easy. That's got to be a sixth, okay? Let's ask that question. Does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? In other words, does an A belong to the C major scale? Well, of course it does. There it is right there, and we see it in the scale. So since the answer is yes, we're dealing with either a major or a perfect interval. Well, we can never have a perfect sixth. That's not possible. It's got to be, therefore, a major sixth. All right, let's go on to this next one. C up to A flat. Well, the number is also easy. That's got to be a sixth. Then, same question. Does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? Does an A flat belong to the C major scale? No, of course not. So this is where we need to do some comparing. Well, we know it's a sixth. Let's compare it to the sixth that is in the scale. And we have it right here. A C up to a regular A, by definition, has to be a major sixth. And what we have in the real world, because of the flat, is we have something that's a half step smaller. So what's a half step smaller than a major sixth? It's got to be a minor sixth. Okay, let's go over here and continue. The best way to learn this method is just to see a bunch of different examples. So E up to G sharp. Well, the number's got to be a third. That's easy. Okay, does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? Does the G sharp belong to an E major scale? This is where your knowledge of major key signatures really comes in handy. What's the key signature for E major? Well, it's 4 sharps, and the scale looks something like this. So, is there a G sharp in that E major scale? Yeah, you better believe it. There it is, due to the key signature. So since the answer is yes here, it's either major or perfect. Well, if it's a third, it's got to be, therefore, major. All right. Let's go on to a slightly more unusual one here. We've got an F and a D sharp. It's a harmonic interval. Same process, though. What's the number? That's easy. That's a sixth. Does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? Is there a D sharp in the F major scale? F major scale is pretty easy. 1 flat. There we have it. Is there a D sharp in that scale? No, but we already know it's a sixth. What kind of sixth do we have in this major scale? Of course, from F to regular D, by definition, it's got to be a major sixth. So in the major scale, we have this. In the real world, with that D sharp, it's actually a half step larger than major, so it's got to be augmented. This is therefore an augmented sixth. All right, let's take this next one. D flat down to G. Number part first, that's easy, that's a fifth. Okay, same old question. Does the D flat belong to the G major scale? G major is an easy one, 1 sharp. Is there a D flat in the scale? No, so we've got to do some comparing again. Well, we already know it's a fifth. What's the fifth that is in the scale? Well, from G to D, by definition, it's got to be perfect, okay? In the scale, we have this. In the real world, because of the flat in front of the D, we have something that's a half step smaller. So it's not a perfect fifth. It is now a diminished fifth. Okay, last one, kind of tricky. Maybe it looks like finally we're dealing with a real piece of music with a key signature and a time signature. So this C sharp to E flat sounds like this. But we're still going to use exactly the same method. Figure out the number first. That's easy. That's a third. Now, we're going to ask this same question. Does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? In other words, does the E flat, due to the key signature, belong to the C sharp major scale? Notice that we're not concerned with the B flat major scale at all. We're just focused on these two notes. So again, does the top note belong to the bottom note's major scale? Does E flat belong to the C sharp major scale? Well, C sharp major scale, that's kind of annoying. That's got all 7 sharps, and it looks something like this. So, is there an E flat in the C sharp major scale? No, not even close. We know it's a third. What kind of third do we have in the C sharp major scale? Well, from C sharp to E sharp, that's got to be a major third. C sharp to E natural has got to be the minor third. And then what we actually have, C sharp to E flat, is yet another half step smaller. So what we have is therefore a diminished third. Okay, so now you get to practice. You're going to see several intervals, and your job is to figure out the complete name, quality and number for each one of them. make sure to use this method. As always, you'll see the problems projected for a few seconds, followed by the answer key so that you can check your work.